Welcome to It's All About the Questions, where learning to ask the right questions can help you achieve a lifelong success. Now, here to help all right questions is award-winning author, international speaker, and business strategist.
Good afternoon and evening, everyone, and welcome to the show this week. We are in extra special today. It's not often I do this, but I am doing a part 2 with the amazing Dr. Joan Rosenberg, author of 90 Seconds to a Life You Love, How to Master Your Difficult Feelings to Cultivate Lasting Confidence, Resilience, and Authenticity. I had Joan on a few weeks back, and I just couldn't get through all the questions that I wanted to ask her. So she was kind enough to agree to be back on the show so we can do a part 2. And if you missed part 1, you can get to the show wherever podcasts you listen to, iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, Google Play, up on the website at it'sallaboutthequestions.com. So I encourage you to get to part 1. And Joan, thank you so much for being here for part 2.
No, thanks so much for having me. I loved being on for part 1. So.
I think you're only the second person I've ever done a 2-part interview with.
Oh, no kidding. Well, I'm honored.
The first one was Dr. Lori Nadell. She wrote the 5 Gifts. I think I mentioned her to you,
right.
Helping people dealing with stress and PTSD and dealing with difficult situations. So it's really funny. The 2 people that I do this with are both doctors who are helping people have their best life possible by healing the internal process.
Yes.
So
yes.
I love that. So on part 1, by the way, how's the book doing? Because I know that you hit number 1, you've done really well with the book, and it should be a New York Times bestseller, and I know that's a huge process, but I want to help make that happen.
That's going to mean lots more books sold, and lots more books sold kind of all at the same time. So it's the book is now becoming part of book clubs. I just had a great conversation with someone, and so I know that I'm told that they're going to use it for book club down there, and people are. My understanding overall is that people are loving the book, so I'm grateful for that, and they're finding it very, very helpful. So by the second or third chapter, people are already going, "Whoa! This explains so much," or I understand so much more about how I operate or how my feelings work, or so it's making a big difference. And yeah, of course, the goal on my end is to get the message out to as many as possible.
For my listeners who perhaps missed the first episode when I had you on, which, guys, go out there and go listen because it's really worth it. The difficult feelings that we're talking about here that you help people process through and master to have resilience and confidence are sadness, shame, helplessness, anger, embarrassment, disappointment, frustration, and vulnerability. And what is it about this 90 seconds to a life you love? I mean, when you're going through and feeling those emotions, it sure feels like it'll never go away. Yet you've seen over the course of 30 plus years of being in practice that really it's 90 seconds you need to process. I don't get it.
So yeah, well, think of it as 90 seconds repeated over and over and over throughout the course of your life. So a couple different things here. And I'll explain why these particular 8 unpleasant feelings. But let me start with the 90 seconds. I wrestled with a question, 2 key questions throughout most of my life, and one was, what is it that helps people gain confidence? And because I was an exquisitely shy child that didn't feel like I belonged, felt really different, and I would look over at these group of kids, and there they would be laughing and connected and confident and seemingly confident, etc. And it was like, how come I don't have that? And I know that that's a lot of people's experience. And then the second question I wrestled with is, what makes it so difficult for most of us to experience unpleasant feelings? Because I had a hard time too. And the more I got into doing the work of psychotherapy and being in psychology, the more I saw that across the board. And so it was like, I gotta understand this. And when the neuroscience discoveries started to come out more towards the late 90s and into the early 2000s, what neuroscientists started to talk about was that the way we experience and come to know what we're feeling emotionally is because we feel it as bodily sensations first. And for years I was telling the people that I was working with, ride the wave of feelings, ride the wave of the feelings. But I never had an explanation for it. When neuroscience came out, I did. And one particular woman, a neuroscientist by the name of Dr. Jill Bolte Taylor, so I didn't make up the 90 seconds. I draw this from her. She's a woman who wrote the book My Stroke of Insight. And in that book, she talks about that when a feeling gets triggered, then what ends up happening is that there's a rush of biochemicals that flow into the bloodstream. And those biochemicals activate bodily sensations. So think of the heat at your chest or into your face when you feel embarrassed. Think of clenched fists or tightening up or a tight jaw when you're angry. Or other clients would describe feeling heat at the back of their neck or heat in their arms when they're angry. Or feeling sad and you feel kind of this heaviness at your chest.
You can't breathe, and the tears are so overwhelming, or you can't get up off the couch, kind of thing.
Right, sure, right. So, but it's all through bodily sensation. It just happens so quickly. We don't have the awareness that that's what's taking place, and then that flush of biochemicals out of the bloodstream occurs within roughly 90 seconds. So the idea then is like what I realized is that, and here's the thing for people to really, really get and understand. That is, what I realized is that it's not that we don't want to feel the full range of our feelings. We don't want to feel the bodily sensations because they're so unpleasant. We don't want to feel the bodily sensations that help us know what we're feeling emotionally. And that's what we want to avoid. And that's why people try to shut down on it. And so once I realized that and realized how short any given feeling was, it's a feeling then basically is a bodily sensation wave. So if I could get people to understand that all they needed to do was to ride one or more, not just one, but one or more bodily sensation waves of any of these given unpleasant feelings, the 8 that I always talk about, then they could basically go pursue anything that they wanted in life. And I'll dig into that in a moment too. But so it's not just one wave, and it's not at any given time. It could be more, and it's not just one wave for the rest of your life. It's any time you have a particular reaction in the course of life. Somebody disappointed you, somebody that you got angry about something, or something made you sad, whatever it is. Ride those waves. It's for the rest of your life. But if you know it's temporary, you can do it.
There's a couple of quotes from your book. One of them in Chapter 9 was something you said to one of your clients, one of your patients. You said, "There will never be a moment in your life that will repeat, and you can never fully re-experience a moment that you have already lived. So life is really about change. Life involves solving the various challenges and problems you are faced with on a daily basis. It is about handling the constancy of change, not the constancy of routine." Mm-hmm. That was so powerful for me, and talking about what you were just talking about these 90 seconds. For me, especially when I was going through the deep grief with my mom that still flares up, and, that's how you and I first initially met, even way before Mom had passed away, just at the time, and everybody can hear all about that on part 1 of the show, it feels like when you're processing through or feeling that emotion that you've had that exact thing before. But when I read what you wrote in Chapter 9 about up-leveling confidence and resilience, what you're saying is it may seem like it's the same emotion, but it's not, because it's about something else. It's not the same trigger, or that's a concept I've been struggling with.
It's not the same moment in time.
Okay.
As you go through life, you gain more maturity and more wisdom and more experiences You may be in a different city in that moment that you're having something that seems so parallel to what you experienced before. So you're not reliving the same moment. That we can't ever go back. Think of experiences that you've absolutely loved, or feeling super connected to someone, but you can't. You might recapture parallel experiences of that, but it's not the exact same thing. Think of when people go to conferences and they have this amazing time. That experience doesn't get repeated. Something parallel to that might, but that very experience doesn't get repeated. And so that's part of what I mean, is that as we age, we're in the next moment, we're not the same. Especially if we're invested in growing emotionally and kind of growing in wisdom and maturity and emotionally, that we're not exactly the same. And so that's part of what I mean. The other is that when we think about a memory that pulls up the same feelings, that elicits the same feelings, because the feelings are tied to the memory in terms of the way the brain encodes memories. If I think of a particular memory and I think about it again and again, it's going to fire off the same approximate pattern, not the exact pattern, but the same approximate pattern that fired off the first time I felt the feeling. So it's not exactly the same.
So that to me seems like it would potentially lessen the intensity by saying to myself, okay, this may feel like the exact same trigger or the exact same emotion, but it's going to be slightly different because I'm different than I was the first time I had it. So thinking about it that way and processing the 90 seconds of allowing that to go through my body can help me, if I think of it that way, work through it.
Sure. I mean, and part of it is, I think, adopting the attitude, one, that I'm going to make my way through. Here's probably the best way. I can think of any given feeling as being brief.
Okay.
It's temporary. And in situations of grief, in particular, I think it's different. I think that and in the book I talk about grief as kind of waves of waves. We have this level of attachment to people, and it's not easy to have that necessarily resolved. And if you think of having, it's like a well-worn path, right?
Okay.
So you can think of let's say you walk to a given store, or you walk someplace using the same path over and over and over again. And if there wasn't anything there before, like the grass was all green and you kept on walking the same path, you'd wear out the green and now you'd literally be able to see that path. Well, that's what happens in the brain. Basically, a path gets created the more you repeat something.
Okay.
And so think of being attached to somebody, right? So and emotionally, and so we get really attached, and we have the same experiences with that person day after day after day after day after day. So now we're into weeks and into months and into years and into decades of certain kind of repeated exchanges with people. Well, you can imagine how well-worn that path is. So the person passes away. So I'm using kind of your mom as a reference point here. The person passes away, and it's like that path was embedded for years. It's not just going to release and disappear and all the grass is going to grow green over it right away. That's going to take some time. So that you have to think of creating new experiences that can start a variety of different paths, so that one path can be grown over a little bit, metaphorically.
Right.
Right. So that anytime we still have a memory of that person, then it stirs up, it activates, again, the same approximate firing patterns, and then we're into the tears of grief again. But if we understand, again, this is just the process of grief, that it comes and goes, sometimes totally spontaneously and unexpectedly, especially when we love somebody deeply. And that over time, it doesn't mean that the grief will ever entirely go away, because we still have those memories embedded in our brain. But it means that what will happen is that grief can lessen. The intensity of it lessens.
In your book on page 216, you mentioned that you were talking about your grief reset protocol in this chapter in the book, but you said, making your way through this grief then is a crucial step as you move toward greater emotional well-being and emotional mastery. You're able to release anger, bitterness, grudges, and resentment, and can instead be less emotionally reactive and become a compassionate observer to what used to trigger you. You'll notice that you naturally become more spontaneous and present. You become self-aware and self-attuned. You possess the ability to feel and live in, and I love this part, and with your moment-to-moment experience. And I've really noticed that since I read the book and since I met you years and years ago as well, that really, when I allow myself to just be in whatever that emotion is for the 90 seconds, or sometimes it feels like for an eternity going through it, each time I allow myself to feel that, it seems to have less power over me.
Correct. Right. Exactly. That's exactly what I'm talking about.
Okay.
Yes. Yep.
All right. That was huge for me. The first time you had ever given me that concept before you had written this book, that whole idea. And then I'm sorry, I'm reading parts of your book because it's just so powerful. I want my listeners to get it. So there's another thing that you wrote. Know that facing the truth within yourself is the only thing that puts you in a right relationship with yourself, leading to a sense of calm and inner peace, and is the only thing that can lead to love within and for yourself. The more you stay present to the truth of what your life was, the more you free yourself to create a life you love. Can you expand upon that? Because I feel like it's such a critical piece for my listeners. I know it is for me, because I didn't want to face, with my mom especially, and with the end of my second marriage, and just everything that's been going on with my health, I didn't want to acknowledge that this is the truth of what my life was right now. So it controlled me.
And once you started facing the truth, it changed.
It has really begun to change. It's like, okay, this is my truth, but it doesn't have to stay my truth. My truth is I have some health issues. My truth is I can get triggered with vertigo by speaking. But there are moments where that doesn't happen. And while I'm feeling it, I don't have to necessarily stop my life. Or I can find ways to work with my clients that work. And I've started picking up 100-day mentoring clients again, saying to them, we may have an appointment at a point in time, but I may have to reschedule that for an hour later or the next day, as long as you understand that, or we may have to do it via text. And they're like, okay, no problem, because they're still getting the value, but I've had to learn to adjust. Whereas before, I stopped myself completely from doing business.
Interesting. Okay.
So I'm using myself as an example.
Sure.
Okay.
And so facing your truth made a difference. Here's what I think happens, and I talk about it scattered throughout the book, that when we dismiss what we know to be the truth, and what I call that is trying not to know what we know. Okay. That's a moment where we disconnect from our very strength. Think of Samson having his hair cut off. Metaphorically, we've just unplugged from our source of strength the moment we engage in disconnection and distraction and suppressing the very thing that we know to be true for ourselves. And And so that we take if we've just kind of cut ourselves off from the source, then there's no way for us to have the confidence in everything else that we want to have, because we don't have the fullness of it. We have an awareness of it, but we don't have the we're not plugged in. We don't have the access to the full source. So the moment we allow ourselves to know the truth of what we experience, even if it's painful, we're more congruent and we're more plugged in. So we now have full access to everything that's available to us. And when we try to cut off from the if you think of, I've got so many thoughts in my head, I'm cutting off my own sentences. when we think of feelings, including the unpleasant ones that you named earlier, as being available for us for the purposes of protection. When we cut off from those, we actually feel more vulnerable, not less. So we can't, there's no way for us to have that right relationship with ourselves, because we're trying to distance ourselves from the very thing that's happening within us. So the more we can acknowledge the truth of what's going on within ourselves, the more congruent we are, our thoughts and feelings and our words and actions match up better.
Yes.
Where all four of those are aligned. And when we do that, we're in right relationship with ourselves, and that's when we feel a calmness and an inner peace and contentment.
Okay. And in just under 2 minutes, we're going to be going over to national news. But before we go into there, in just a minute or so, can you explain how somebody can determine if they're in truth or not? And
that's individual to the person. So it's how, whatever that shift was for you to acknowledge something and then to not acknowledge it, and then to acknowledge it and notice the difference. You had an awareness that you were trying to push something away. So we had the interesting thing about the human beings is that we have an ability to know what we know, to notice what we notice, to be aware of what we're aware of. It's called metacognition, meta-awareness. It's knowing about knowing. And as human beings, we're able to do that. And so the more we can stay in that knowing, as opposed to trying to not observe what we observe, the more congruent we are, the more congruent, the more confident, the more congruent, the more calm and centered.
Okay. All right, everybody, we're going into the national news. I'd like you to think about some emotion that you're feeling right now, and national news will be at least 90 seconds. So just feel into whatever that emotion is. Just let it process through you. And if you want, and you're listening live, you can shoot me an email at laura@laurastewart.com, or you can go out on social media and just say, hey, this is what I'm feeling. And we'll be back with more from Dr. Joan Rosenberg. Welcome back, everyone. We are here continuing our conversation with the incomparable Dr. Joan Rosenberg, author of 90 Seconds to a Life You Love, How to Master Your Difficult Feelings to Cultivate Lasting Confidence, Resilience, and Authenticity. And this is part 2 of my interview with her. I had part 1 several weeks ago, and I had so many questions, I couldn't fit them all in during one interview, so we are blessed to have her back with us today. Thanks again, Joan, for being here with me.
Well, of course, I'm thrilled. Really, really thrilled.
All right, so we were talking about connecting into your own truth, knowing what truth is for you versus this idea of what you may be saying to yourself isn't necessarily the truth of what's going on. And that's a hard concept for a lot of my listeners, both personally and in business for them, because they feel that whatever's actually happening is truth. And one of the things you talk about throughout in this book is sometimes our emotions can be so overwhelming, especially around the those what we consider negative emotions of sadness, shame, helplessness, anger, embarrassment, disappointment, frustration, and vulnerability, that it disguises the actual truth? Is that the best way to is that an accurate description?
I don't know that I would say it disguises the truth. That so many people don't want to experience those feelings because they're unpleasant in the body. Not negative nor bad. I don't consider them negative or bad because they're protective in nature, but they don't want to experience them, so that they move away from them, and as a result, then they're moving away from what's really going on.
Okay. I remember one time when we first met, you had said, my emotions were so over the top, I couldn't stop crying because of something my ex-husband had said, and it was just a minor thing, but internally it was so blown out of proportion in my response to it. And you said it's got nothing really to do about what happened in that moment. It was pent up from some other things. And
yeah, let me explain that one.
I really appreciate it.
Because that reaction is a little bit like a radar guide for me.
Okay.
So when somebody reacts intensely to something minor, so it's a reaction that seems out of proportion to the event, and not where spouses are calling each other out and going, "Well, you're overreacting." I'm talking about a serious, mostly because they're saying you're overreacting because they don't want to deal with what's going on. I'm not talking about that kind of a response. I'm talking about a response in this case where you experience something minor with your ex, but it felt so big and so kind of, to your words, kind of blown out of proportion. When it is out of proportion, when one's reaction is really out of proportion to what's taking place, then generally speaking, there's a tie-in to something in the past. And I've personally or professionally never found that not to be true.
Okay.
It's just, and so that many times what ends up happening is that people don't deal. They're not dealing moment to moment with the experience. Stuff gets kind of absorbed and shut down on, and then it collects. Now you're collecting incident after incident after incident after incident, and then at some point that small incident that parallels it happens, or is the exact thing. And then it's a gush out like a fire hose geyser, right? So if people would deal in the moments that they think, and they could get addressed, and I'm not talking about it in a mean way, I'm talking about it in a well-intentioned way, then it would come out like a water faucet. But if it doesn't get dealt with, and all you do is shut down, disconnect, distract, not deal with it, whatever it might be, then when that next minor incident happens, then it's going to come gushing out like a fire hose. That's how I knew that it was connected to something, something or some things that had happened before.
What I realized over the years of processing through that one moment, and you talk about that in your book in the later chapters, I started taking it to this whole idea of I can't move forward. These over fire hose kind of reactions to something, like if I fail at something, or I've seen this with my clients. They're like, I can never do this, and it seems like they're constantly stuck. They're afraid to now take risks because they get an over fire hose reaction, using those words, when it's not really true. If you can take them back and get them to break it, whatever they're feeling, down, and reframe the whole concept of failure instead of, oh, you're overly emotional, or saying, I always fail, which really isn't the truth, right? Because if somebody always failed, what would happen? Joan?
They would just keep learning. I look at failure as, some people call failures mistakes. And many people will call failures learning opportunities. So the first thing is to reframe the word failure, period. It's like all it is a learning opportunity. That's it. Nothing more than that. Something didn't work out, and now it's a learning opportunity. What do you have to do different?
But
go ahead.
When somebody's in failure, all of these negative emotions come up. That you talk about learning how to master your difficult feelings.
Right. So let's walk through that again. Okay. Let's not call them. I'm going to challenge you here a little bit. Let's not call them negative.
Okay.
They're unpleasant. Okay. So the way I talk about it in the book, so spoiler alert for everybody, is that failure. If we think of failure, most people think of failure as not achieving what I set out to achieve. And it's a decent enough definition, but it doesn't cut it for me. So the next way to look at it is it's not achieving what I set out to achieve, especially the first time I set out to achieve it. Because to your point, so many people quit after they've not had something happen the way they wanted the first time. But that's not the way I look at failure. One, I look at failure as a learning opportunity. And two, I reframed that other definition that I was using a moment ago a little bit differently. So failure is difficulty tolerating one or more of the 8 unpleasant feelings that get elicited or evoked when you don't achieve what you set out to achieve, especially the first time you set out to achieve it. So what I found is that when people get stopped by failure or people don't want to take risks, it's not the risk that they have a hard time with. It's not the failure that they have a hard time with, like the thing not working out that they have a hard time with. They have a hard time with the emotional outcome of it not working out. So if I can get people to understand that all dealing with failure is dealing with the emotional outcome, and you know that all you have to do is to ride waves of unpleasant bodily sensation to make your way through the feelings you have about it, then you can go pursue whatever you want.
I'm just sitting here, I've got goosebumps because what you just said is so powerful. In my own experience running a multi-state company and then afterwards and even taking care of my mom, my marriages, when I got stuck in that failure mindset was when I didn't allow myself to process through and truly feel those things, like the shame, the embarrassment, the disappointment, the frustration, feeling vulnerable.
Yeah.
And sadness. And if I see this with my clients all the time, you don't allow yourself to, and then you just get stuck. So what can somebody do? What question can they ask themselves when they're, say, feeling that, to help them become aware? I mean, obviously the show is going to help them become aware right now, and your book.
And what question when they feel like they're stuck in failure?
Yeah, because you can process through it, but
yeah, sure. Well, then if they're getting concerned about failure, then the question that I would have them ask themselves is, what is it that feels harder for me to know, think, feel, or bear that's underneath this?
Okay.
So that would be the question, or what unpleasant feelings are underneath this that are harder for me to experience.
Does it also apply not only to failure but to success?
Oh, heck yeah, yes. Because in order, one of the things I say in the book, we fail our way to success. None of us succeeds alone, so we have to get over that little bias. Lone Ranger doesn't cut it for any of us. Ever. even if we think we're doing stuff alone, there's people around us supporting us in ways we can't even imagine. And so even if somebody's cooking you a meal so you can go out and see a client, whatever it is, then you've just been supported. You're not succeeding alone. So we should get over that idea about that. The second is that we can adopt a whole host of attitudes that make a big difference. So one is let me walk us through again. I'm kind of tripping over my own words. One is none of us succeeds alone. The second is failure is just a learning opportunity. Third, it's not the risk we're afraid of. It's the emotional outcome of taking the risk that we want to back off away from. So again, if you know that you can manage and make your way through those 8 unpleasant feelings, which I talk about throughout the whole book, it's really the essence of the book, then you can go pursue anything you want in life. In fact, and then you adopt what I call a resilience mindset. And part of the resilience mindset includes being able to, knowing you can manage those 8 unpleasant feelings. A part of the resilience mindset is being able to ask for help. And I have like a checklist that's probably got 18 to 20 different items on it. And so one of them has to do with you, because you read something about change, that you understand that change is the constant, and that we accept periods of grace, that we accept periods of quiet and stability with grace and gratitude, but understand that change is the constant. Faith is another resilience attitude. Understanding that every life experience is a learning opportunity is another attitude. Holding an optimistic point of view. Approaching life with curiosity and openness. All these different kinds of things are attitudes that you can hold in addition to being able to manage those 8 unpleasant feelings. And when you hold those attitudes, they're going to help you be resilient. Another one I believe is let's see, I actually was able to open to the spot in the book. I will persist and persevere because those are integral aspects of facing challenges, being successful, and achieving my dreams. So it's holding that attitude that I'm just going to persist and persevere till I get there. Wherever you're there is. So there's much you can do to both work with the unpleasant feelings and hold attitudes that then support wherever it is you want to go.
And throughout the entire book, you have checklists, you have exercises, journaling, things that people can work through when they're going through it. I love the resilience, attitude, intention, and action checklist towards the end of the book.
Yeah.
Which, for me, that just really takes everything we've been talking about in this part 2 of the interview that you can just go through. And I love this one. I know I have faced other difficult life circumstances, and I can draw on my own experience of having successfully made it through them to face my current challenges.
Right.
Because that kind of helps take me out of that rut.
Yeah, no, actually, yes, definitely. Well, and for me, that was there's a story that I told with regard to that one earlier in the book, which is the story about the ski dude.
Oh yeah, I love that story. Go ahead, keep going.
So, I was working with a client, and sometimes I'll have ideas in my head, and I know that they're actually coming out of the experience that's taking place between the two of us, but I don't know exactly where that it feels like the thought's out of the blue, and so I was working with this one guy, and I looked at him, and I said, did you ever ski? And he said, yeah. And this is a guy who came in to see me because he was having panic attacks and high anxiety. And I said, snowboard? He goes, yeah. He said, I actually skied and snowboarded competitively. It's like, what? He goes, yeah. And I said, black diamonds? He goes, yeah. I said, double black diamonds? He goes, yeah. I said, so where's Ski Dude? And what I meant by that is that if you think about what it takes to snowboard down a mountain that's extremely difficult, so the black diamond is a representative of that, or the double black diamond is even harder.
I fell getting off the ski lift and couldn't get back up.
But there you go. So or to do it on two skis instead of a snowboard. It doesn't matter to me whether it's the two skis or it's the snowboard. The level of difficulty and the level of balance, and the combination of balance and speed coming down a sheer mountain is incredible. What it takes to do that, the determination and the courage and all that kind of stuff, and the physical skill. And here's a guy who did that, yet he's coming in and being debilitated by his own panic attacks. And when I said, where's Ski Dude, what I was trying to communicate to him is that you have this resourcefulness inside of you and your ability to go after something with dogged determination. That Ski Dude guy can face down the panic attacks. So I was inviting him to pull on draw from a resource within himself of his own successes to face down the anxiety and the panic that he was experiencing. It made a huge difference. And so what I'll do is I'll always look for that in someone's life. It's like, where's that resource within them that they can pull on? And it's always there. People have always done something in their lives that they've done well at. You can always draw on that as a resource to help you make it through and be resilient in the next thing.
I'm working with a client right now who used to have 2 offices and sold his business, and now he's running his business a completely different way, and he's like, I can't do this, I don't know how to do this. And I'm like, you had 2 offices, successfully sold it, so why are you thinking you still don't have those same skill sets?
Right, exactly.
Ski Dude.
Yeah.
Right?
Ski Dude. Yeah, it's a Ski Dude moment.
Yeah, that's going to be my new catchphrase. Bring out your internal Ski Dude.
That's right.
Where's your Ski Dude?
Or do that, yeah. Yes.
And
exactly.
Everybody that's listening, Joan has, the book is available wherever books are sold, 90 Seconds to a Life You Love, How to Master Your Difficult Feelings to Cultivate Lasting Confidence, Resilience, and Authenticity. But you have incredible resources out there at drjoanrosenberg.com for people. You have companion worksheets, guided exercises, and other resources, correct?
Yeah, that's actually, for those who get the book, there's a particular resource. Some of those resources that I mentioned in the book are available to them,
right,
as kind of worksheets, so that they don't have to, write in the book if they don't want to,
right.
And for others, if they want, they can go to Dr. Joan Rosenberg /gift, and there's I think a download of the 8 unpleasant feelings and 2 other things that are available to them. I think there's they might even have access to chapter 1 of the book or something. And I can't remember. There's 3 different things that are there that if people want to go ahead and get that, they can.
Okay. And for people who have bought the book, you have a Facebook group where they can talk about stuff that's coming up for them, and you're there and you're helping people, and everybody's helping each other. What is that?
Yeah, it's Life You Love.
Okay.
So and actually that's available to everybody. It's not just available to people who bought the book. But if they get the book, it'll make more sense because of the approach. And again, there's many things that I talk about in the book that are kind of counterintuitive and a little bit different than a lot of other folks have talked about things. So it's just a whole different way to kind of look at life. I mean, I included in the book a compliment blockers checklist. For God's sake, who talks about blocking compliments? But there's a whole important piece, I think, on why it's important for us to accept compliments. as part of this overall approach to building confidence and resilience.
Which is so hard for so many people to do, to accept a compliment they'd rather give them than accept them. They don't know how to respond.
Right, yep. But I think it's super important for us to absorb them and take them in.
Okay. So last thought you'd like to leave with my listeners today.
Actually, let's leave on compliments. That's a great thing to leave with. So actually, I'll leave two pieces, and one I might have said before.
In less than 2 minutes.
Okay, I can do it. The first is to accept compliments, and why? Because they're a reflection of you back to you. They help you update your self-image.
Great.
And the second is, it's super important to do that. The second is just knowing that if you can ride one or more 90-second bodily sensation waves of one or more of 8 unpleasant feelings, you can go pursue anything you want in life.
And people can find you and reach out to you and get your book. How?
drjohnrosenberg.com. Go Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Instagram, the Facebook group. I've got two TED Talks out there. There's Psychology Today. There's a Quora Sessions. I am all over that World Wide Web.
Okay, and the book is available wherever books are sold. It's 90 Seconds to a Life You Love, How to Master Your Difficult Feelings to Cultivate Lasting Confidence, Resilience, and Authenticity. So I want to thank you so much for agreeing to be back on for the second time. You're only my second author that I've done 2 parts with.
Well, I love you, and I'm happy to do it. And the messages to me is so important to talk about. So thank you very much for having me back.
Well, it's great because, knowing you as I do and having read this book, it changed my life. And I know it's changing the lives of a lot of other people that have gotten copies of the book and have been reading it, which is why I love to bring people like you on my show. So everybody go to Dr., short for Dr., JoanRosenberg.com. Go get a copy of the book and let us know what you think. And Joan, have an amazing rest of your day.
Same. Thanks so much again.
All right, everybody, remember that the right questions can change your life. So what are you asking yourself today? And if you're not sure what questions you should be asking, reach out to me at laura@laurastewart.com, or I'm all over social media. I want to help you. We can do 100-day mentoring or more. Have a blessed day, everyone, and hug someone you love. Take care.
You've been listening to It's All About the Questions, starring Laura Stewart. Connect with Laura at it'sallaboutthequestions.com and download a free workbook that will help you ask better questions starting today.